Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Screaming Mummy. The year is 1881. You are Emile Bruges, assistant curator at the Bulak Museum in Cairo, and you have just descended into a shaft cut into the cliffs at Deir el-Bahri. A local tomb robber led you here. For the past decade, that robber's family had been selling royal amulets and papyri on the black market. Today, you find the source. A hidden chamber packed with some of the most important royal mummies in Egyptian history. Seti I, Ramesses II, Thutmose III, 40 of them, stacked like furniture, sealed in the dark for 3,000 years. Then you see one that doesn't belong. It is wrapped not in linen but in sheepskin. There is no coffin, no name, no ritual text to guide it to the afterlife, and its face is locked in a silent scream, mouth stretched wide, head thrown back, hands bound behind the back with leather cord. Every other royal mummy in this chamber was prepared for eternal rest. This one was prepared for something else entirely. This is Unknown Man E. And in 3,200 years, nobody has figured out who he was, why he died like that, or why the Egyptians buried him here among kings he may have tried to kill. The sheepskin wrapping is not a minor detail. In ancient Egyptian culture, sheepskin was ritually impure, specifically excluded from sacred contexts. Wrapping a human body in it was not just unusual. It was deliberate desecration, a calculated spiritual humiliation understood by every Egyptian who prepared the burial. This person was denied the protective linen, denied the coffin text, denied the name that would allow his soul to navigate the afterlife. Whatever happened to Unknown Man E, those responsible wanted his eternity to be as terrible as his death. The physical evidence is equally disturbing. Paleopathological analysis confirms his hands were bound while he was alive. The positioning of the skeletal remains and the contraction of surviving soft tissue are consistent with death under extreme physical distress. The open-mouthed expression is not post-mortem decomposition. Muscles do not contract into that configuration after death. This person died screaming, or was positioned to appear to scream, and the embalming process fixed him there permanently. The leading theory centers on a man named Pentawere. In 1155 BCE, Ramesses III was the target of an assassination plot organized by a secondary wife named Tia, who wanted to place her son on the throne. The conspiracy was uncovered, documented in what is now called the Judicial Papyrus of Turin. Most conspirators were executed. Pentawere was offered a royal mercy: take his own life. Whether he did it willingly is unrecorded. In 2012, a team led by Zahi Hawass published DNA analysis of Unknown Man E in the British Medical Journal. The results confirmed he was male, aged approximately 18 to 25 at death, and carried genetic markers consistent with New Kingdom royal lineage. A separate analysis identified biological evidence suggesting possible asphyxiation as the cause of death. If Pentawere died by his own hand, it appears to have been administered under duress, with the binding preventing a change of mind. The wrapping in sheepskin, the absence of all funerary rites, the binding, the expression, every element is consistent, with a condemned man denied the afterlife as further punishment. The Egyptians believed that destroying a person's name and denying proper burial effectively erased their existence from eternity. Whoever ordered this burial understood exactly what they were doing. The Cairo Egyptian Museum has displayed Unknown Man E intermittently over the past century. Museum administration has conducted internal reviews about his placement, documented in Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities records from 2010 and 2019. The reviews cite visitor distress and documented discomfort among conservation staff assigned to work near him for extended periods. The reviews keep happening. The decisions keep coming back to the same answer: leave him where he is. The official theory satisfies almost everything. A condemned prince, denied dignity in death, preserved so that his torment would be visible for eternity. The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, and yet no document from Ramesses III's reign states explicitly what happened to Pentaware's body. The connection is inference. The man in that case might be someone else entirely, someone whose story has no theory attached to it at all. Why does the decision about where to keep him require formal institutional review every decade? If he is Pentawere, who made the choice to bury him among the pharaohs he plotted to murder, and was that decision made out of contempt or out of something closer to fear? And why, After 3,200 years, does the Cairo Museum still find it necessary to revisit that question? Number 2. The Unlucky Mummy. The year is 1890. You are a photographer hired by the British Museum to document a new acquisition. The object is a gilded mummy board, a painted wooden panel, the inner lid of an Egyptian sarcophagus, depicting a young woman with dark eyes and a serene expression. She is 2,900 years old. You set up your equipment. You take the photograph. 3 days later, you are in hospital with a severe infection in your arm. The arm is amputated. The photographic negative, the museum tells you later, came out blurred the face on the mummy board perfectly clear, everything surrounding it distorted into darkness. This is EA 22542. The British Museum has owned it for over 130 years. In all that time, the list of misfortunes connected to people who handled it has never been officially compiled. That, perhaps, is the most telling thing about it. The mummy board belongs to a chantress of Amun, a female musician priest who served at the temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak during the 21st dynasty, approximately 950 BCE. No mummy was ever found with it. The board traveled to London alone, purchased by a collector in Luxor, passed through several private hands, and entered the British Museum as catalogue number EA 22542. The chantress title carried specific religious weight. These women were full participants in the ritual economy of the temple, performing sacred music that sustained divine order. Their burial equipment was made with corresponding care. The board is intact, well made, and its owner was someone of genuine religious standing. The ownership chain before the museum contains a series of misfortunes difficult to dismiss without further evidence. The collector who purchased it at Luxor, documented in an 1895 account in the Daily Mail, reported financial ruin within 2 years and died shortly after selling it. The journalist who wrote the dismissive account of the board's supposed curse in that same article died unexpectedly within the year. The photographer whose case opened this section was one of at least 3 staff members documented in museum administrative files from the 1890s as having suffered medical incidents following direct contact with the board. None of these incidents are supernatural. They are a list of people and a list of things that happened to those people. The British Museum correctly does not acknowledge a connection. Correlation is not causation, and the Egyptian collections contain thousands of objects from the same period. What the museum does acknowledge, in its public catalog entry for EA 22542, is that the board has been periodically rotated off display for conservation purposes. The board is painted wood in a climate-controlled gallery. Other objects of comparable age and material in the same gallery have been on continuous display for decades. No conservation document specific to EA 22542 has been made publicly available to explain the rotation schedule. The most famous claim about this board is that it was aboard the Titanic. This is not true. The claim originated with journalist William Thomas Stead, a frequent visitor to the British Museum, who told the story of a cursed mummy board at a dinner party aboard the Titanic on the night of April 14, 1912. Stead was one of 1,500 people who died when the ship sank. In the days after the disaster, newspapers reported he had been traveling with the actual mummy. He was not, but Stead had published multiple articles about the board's misfortune history. He knew the story. He told it that night. He did not survive the night. The board is currently in room 62 of the British Museum. The portrait eyes dark, direct, painted by someone who knew how to hold attention, appear to track movement as you walk past. This is a real optical phenomenon with a name, the Mona Lisa effect. It is physics. Flat painted surfaces with specific pupil placement produce this result. The museum provides this explanation on its public materials. But the conservation rotations continue. And in 130 years of ownership, no curator has made the simple, direct statement that the pattern of misfortunes among previous handlers is coincidence, and that the rotation schedule is standard practice, applied equally across the collection. If the rotation schedule is routine conservation, why does no conservation document specify what it is conserving against? If the ownership misfortunes are coincidence, why has no curator said so? The mummy board is 2,900 years old, intact, and currently on display. What does the British Museum know about its provenance that has never appeared in a public catalogue entry, and why, after 130 years, Are they still deciding how much of that to share? Number 3. The Hand of Glory. The year is 1735. You are a magistrate in Knaresborough, Yorkshire, reviewing the contents of a satchel confiscated from a man arrested for breaking into a farmhouse. The constable lays the items on your desk one at a time: picks, rope, and then a dried human hand, fingers curled upward, each fingertip fitted with a candle stub made from yellowish tallow. You know what this is. Every magistrate in England knows what this is. The man in the cell may have believed it worked. This is a Hand of Glory. The only confirmed surviving specimen is at Whitby Museum in Yorkshire. For approximately 40 years, from the 1960s through the early 2000s, the museum kept it in a box. The procedure for creating a Hand of Glory is documented in multiple grimoires from the 16th through 18th centuries. The hand had to be taken from a man who had been hanged, amputated at the gallows immediately after death. It was then preserved in a salt and saltpeter preparation. Recipes vary between sources, but the salt and saltpeter are consistent across almost every version. The result was a mummified hand, dried to rigidity, fitted with candles made from the fat of the executed man's own body. The belief was specific. Lighting all 5 candles simultaneously would render every occupant of a household unconscious or paralyzed, unable to wake until the candles were extinguished. Only milk could put them out. Water would not work. Giambattista della Porta described a version of this belief in his 1558 Magiae Naturalis. Reginald Scott's 1584 discovery of witchcraft includes it. Among the superstitions he was actively trying to debunk, his inclusion is itself documentary evidence. The belief was widespread enough to require debunking. The Petit Albert's 1668 version is the most detailed surviving recipe. These are real primary sources, not retrospective folk legend. The Old Bailey Online records a digitized archive of London court proceedings from 1674 to 1913, contain multiple references to Hands of Glory confiscated from defendants charged with housebreaking. These were not witchcraft prosecutions. They were property crime cases where the Hand of Glory was treated as a tool of the trade. The courts treated possession as aggravating evidence of premeditation. They took it seriously because the criminals carried it seriously. The Whitby specimen was discovered in 1935 during renovation of a cottage in Castleton, near Whitby, sealed inside a wall. Objects concealed in building structures across northern Europe frequently carried protective or warding significance. Their placement inside walls was deliberate, not accidental. The hand was donated to Whitby Museum and added to the permanent collection. At some point in the 1960s, it was removed from display and boxed. Museum records do not contain a specific curatorial decision explaining the change. The official position, when pressed by journalists, references conservation concerns and sensitivity about displaying human remains. These are legitimate museum considerations. They are also applied inconsistently. The same museum displays other human remains, and no conservation report specific to the hand has been made public. The hand was eventually returned to display and is now exhibited in a case, labeled, documented, and viewable. What the 40 years of storage was actually about remains undocumented. The hand itself is a severed human left hand preserved in a salt-based preparation that laboratory analysis has confirmed is consistent with the historical recipes. The fingers are desiccated to leather-like rigidity, and the fingertips are worn in a pattern consistent with having held candles not from the mummification process, but from use afterward. That last detail is the significant one, not because it proves anything supernatural, because it proves someone made this object deliberately, following a recipe from a person, and then someone used it. The wear at the fingertips did not come from the drying process. It came from light and heat and the specific friction of wax against dried skin. Someone lit the candles, someone believed it would work. And given what the Old Bailey records show, someone else believed it enough to carry it into a stranger's house at night. If it was just folklore, why do court records spanning 200 years show real courts treating possession as criminal evidence rather than eccentric superstition? If the museum's concerns were conservation, why does no document from 40 years of storage specify what required protecting? And what happened to all the Hands of Glory confiscated by magistrates and never preserved the ones that went into furnace fires or unmarked graves and the people who made them? Number 4. The Delhi Purple Sapphire. The year is 1944. You are a curator at the Natural History Museum, London, opening a package that arrived with a recently deceased collector's estate. Inside, a purple gemstone set in silver, wrapped in a small bag. You reach in and your fingers close around a folded piece of paper. You open it. The handwriting is careful, the writing of a man who chose every word deliberately. It begins. This stone is trebly accursed and is stained with the blood and dishonor of everyone who has ever owned it. The previous owner is begging you, from beyond his death, to never let anyone wear this stone. The Delhi Purple Sapphire is not actually a sapphire. It is an amethyst, a purple variety of quartz set in heavy silver, decorated with a carved scarab and two astrological symbols. It is held in the mineral collection of the Natural History Museum, London. The letter that came with it is one of the most remarkable documents in the museum's archives. The stone entered England from India after the 1857 rebellion, the conflict the British called the Indian Mutiny. It was brought back by a Colonel W. Ferris of the Bengal Cavalry, acquired from the looted treasury of the Temple of Indra at Kanpur. This was not a purchase. It was a spoil of a war that included the massacre of British civilians and the retaliatory massacre of Indian prisoners. The stone carried the particular weight of an object taken from a place that had been destroyed. Colonel Ferris returned to England. His financial situation collapsed. His health deteriorated. He sold the stone to his son, who reported the same pattern. The son passed it to a friend. 3 people in that friend's immediate circle died by suicide within a year. The friend gave it to Edward Heron Allen. Heron Allen was a barrister, a fellow of the Royal Society, a scholar of Persian poetry, a published violinist, and a man with no patience for superstition. He catalogued every misfortune that occurred after he accepted the stone. He attempted to give it away twice. Both recipients returned it promptly, reporting immediate adverse events. He threw it into the Regent's Canal. 3 months later, a dredger retrieved it and returned it to him through a jeweler who identified it as his property. He then sealed the stone in a series of 7 boxes, each nested inside the next, with protective amulets from multiple religious traditions arranged around it. He kept it sealed for the remainder of his life. When he died in 1943, he arranged the donation to the Natural History Museum with a lengthy handwritten warning letter and strict instructions about its handling. The letter is not merely dramatic. It is methodical, a legal brief for a case Heron Allen knew would never be filed. He lists specific incidents, specific dates, specific people, and their fates. He acknowledges that a rational man should disbelieve everything he has written. He then asks the museum, as a rational institution, to treat every word as true. He requests that any display include his warning as visible text alongside the stone. He asks them to consider, once they have owned it long enough, throwing it into the sea. The Natural History Museum added it to the mineral collection. The letter is in the archives. The stone is exhibited occasionally in the Vault Gallery, its curse history part of the public documentation. Visitors can read an abbreviated version of Heron Allen's warnings on the label. In 2004, the museum loaned the stone for an exhibition. The curator who handled the paperwork reported a series of personal difficulties in the following months. She discussed this in a BBC interview, carefully noting she was not claiming a causal connection. The official position is straightforward. The stone is an amethyst with an unusual provenance that reflects the violence of colonial India. The successive misfortunes of its owners are psychological suggestion and confirmation bias. People who believed the stone was cursed interpreted ordinary setbacks as patterns. That explanation works until you reach Heron Allen. He did not believe in curses. He documented everything anyway. He specifically designed his warnings to reach people who shared his skepticism. What does it mean when a fellow of the Royal Society spends decades building nested boxes around a purple rock because, after exhausting every rational alternative, he could not identify a safer option? The darker possibility is that Heron Allen understood something specific about the stone's provenance, something about what was done in that temple at Kanpur, or what was done to take it that he chose not to write in a letter that would outlive him. His longest and most explicit warnings concern not the stone's properties, but its history. As if the curse was not in the amethyst, but in what the amethyst had witnessed. Why did the Regent's Canal dredger specifically return a sealed stone to a known owner rather than retain it as salvage? What is in the full, unabridged letter that the museum has not made publicly available? And if confirmation bias explains the ownership deaths, what explains Heron Allen, a man who disbelieved the curse, documented it forensically anyway, and then spent the rest of his life trying to contain it? Number 5. The Basano vase. The year is 1988. You are digging in the garden of a property in Silvano d'Orba, a small town in the Alessandria province of northwestern Italy. Your shovel strikes something solid. You work around it carefully and lift out a silver vase, approximately 35 centimeters tall, heavily tarnished but intact. It appears to be centuries old. You turn it over to check the interior. Folded inside the base is a small parchment. You unfold it. The Italian is archaic, the handwriting faded, but the meaning is unambiguous. Do not seek to possess this vase. It brings death. This is the Basano vase. 3 people owned it after 1988. All 3 died within months of acquiring it. Then it disappeared. The vase is 15th century Italian silver, decorated with carved relief work consistent with northern Italian craftwork from the late medieval period. The parchment, when examined by historians contacted by the discoverers, appeared authentic to the same period, approximately the late 1400s, based on the paper, ink, and script style. The family that found it initially refused to sell it, believing the warning should be honored. The decision was eventually made to put it to auction. The parchment was included with the listing. It sold. The first purchaser was a pharmacist in the Alessandria region. He died 3 months after acquiring the vase. Italian regional press, including La Stampa, noted the death as unexpected for a man of his age and apparent health. The vase passed to his estate and was sold again. The second purchaser was a surgeon. He died approximately 4 months after acquiring it. By this point, the pattern was visible enough to attract local journalistic attention. The third purchaser was an archaeologist who had specifically heard the story of the previous 2 deaths and wanted to study the vase professionally. He died within 6 months. At this point, the Italian health ministry became involved. This is not an institution that typically concerns itself with antique silver vases. What specifically prompted their involvement has never been officially explained. What is documented through Italian parliamentary records and press coverage from the early 1990s is that authorities seized the vase following the third death. The official justification cited relates to a public health inquiry connected to the deaths. This is the kind of bureaucratic language that can mean several things. Multiple institutions were subsequently contacted about accepting the vase. The National Museum of Rome declined. Regional museums in northern Italy declined. A private collector in Switzerland who had expressed interest withdrew after the full ownership history was disclosed. The Austrian Museum of Art History in Vienna declined. Museums decline acquisitions regularly for legitimate reasons: provenance disputes, conservation costs, collection focus. They do not typically decline confirmed 15th century silver artifacts on grounds that trace directly to a chain of owner deaths. The vase's current location is not publicly known. The Italian government confirms only that it is held in official custody. No Freedom of Information equivalent request has produced a specific location, a catalog number, or a confirming institution. It is not listed in any publicly accessible museum registry. For practical purposes, the object does not exist. The obvious explanation is straightforward. 3 deaths over 2 years is a coincidence: a pharmacist, a surgeon, and an archaeologist dying of unrelated causes that happen to follow their acquisition of the same antique. Italy's mortality statistics at any given time produce clusters of unrelated deaths among any group of people. The health ministry involvement is most likely a toxicology inquiry. Medieval silver can contain dangerous lead levels, and a public health response to repeated deaths connected to a single antique object would be standard procedure. That explanation requires the toxicology results to have been published. If a 15th century silver vase contained lead compounds at concentrations sufficient to kill 3 people within months of handling, that is a significant public health finding. It would have generated documentation. The other people who handled the vase, the auction staff, the family, the historians who examined the parchment would have required follow-up. None of that documentation has surfaced. The darker possibility is that the Italian government identified something specific about the vase's provenance or composition that cannot be resolved through standard confiscation and disposal procedures, and that the most Manageable outcome was permanent, unacknowledged storage. Not because the object is supernatural, but because whatever it is now a liability that no institution wants to own, explain, or be responsible for. What toxic compound, if identified, would require permanent classified storage rather than controlled disposal and a published finding? Who authorized the health ministry's seizure, and what specific grounds were cited in the internal documentation? And why did 3 people, a pharmacist, a surgeon, and a trained archaeologist who knew the death history, all decide to acquire this object anyway? Number 6. Ötzi the Iceman's curse. The date is September 19th, 1991. You are hiking the Ötztal Alps, on the border between Austria and Italy, at roughly 3,200 meters elevation. The summer has been unusually warm, and the glacier is receding in a way no living person has seen. The ice is blue-gray and ancient, and the silence up here is the kind that sits on you. You spot something dark just below the surface. You move closer. A human face looks back at you from the ice, skin still intact, lips parted, eyes closed. You assume it is a mountaineering accident, a modern death, maybe recent. You are wrong. The body in the ice has been there for 5,300 years. His name is Ötzi. He is the oldest and best preserved natural human mummy ever found. He was murdered shot from behind with a flint-tipped arrow that severed an artery in his left shoulder. He probably bled out within minutes, alone at altitude, on a clear day. And since his discovery, 7 people with direct documented connections to him have died in circumstances that have generated a quiet, persistent question among the researchers who won't say this publicly but have thought about it. The discovery made headlines worldwide. Ötzi went to the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, where he remains in a climate-controlled chamber at -6 degrees Celsius and 98% humidity, viewable through a small refrigerated window. He has been studied more thoroughly than any ancient human in history. His blood type is known. His last meal, red deer, ibex, einkorn wheat, bracket fungus, eaten approximately 30 minutes before he died. His genome confirms cardiovascular disease, lactose intolerance, and genetic kinship with modern Sardinians. What we know less well is this. Rainer Henn, the forensic pathologist who first physically handled Ötzi's body at the recovery site in 1991, died in a car accident in 1992, 1 year after the discovery. Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide who led scientists to the exact location, was killed in an avalanche in 1993. He was the only person in a group of 8 to die. The other 7 walked away. Rainer Holzel, the filmmaker commissioned to document the official removal of the body, died of a brain tumor in 1994 at 47 years old. Helmut Simon, one of the 2 original discoverers, disappeared during a day hike in the Ötztal Alps in 2004. He was found in the glacier 9 days later, at the base of a 300-meter fall. He was 67 and an experienced alpine hiker, in good weather on a familiar route. Dieter Warnecke, the head of mountain rescue, who spent 9 days searching for Helmut Simon, died of a heart attack 1 hour after Simon's funeral. He was 45. Konrad Spindler, the lead archaeologist who first identified Ötzi's significance and directed the scientific response, died in 2005 of multiple organ failure. Tom Loy, the molecular archaeologist who extracted and analyzed blood samples from Ötzi's clothing and tools identifying the blood of 4 different individuals, suggesting a violent confrontation in the hours before the murder, died in 2005 from a rare blood disorder that had developed after he began his Ötzi research. He was working on a book about the Iceman. He never finished it. 7 people. Documented, verifiable, spanning 13 years. The scientific explanation is real and partial. A 2011 study by microbiologist Gotthard Kramer at the University of Leipzig confirmed that sealed ancient environments can preserve viable spores of Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus mold species capable of causing fatal pneumonia in immunocompromised individuals. Rainer Henn handled a 5,300-year-old body directly. He was a forensic pathologist whose immune system was routinely challenged by his work. The biological exposure was real, but Kurt Fritz was not handling a body. He was standing on a glacier 2 years after the recovery, guiding a scientific team. He was the only one in 8 people to die in an avalanche. Avalanches are random events. They do not select for professional association with a specific discovery. The South Tyrol Museum does not address the death pattern publicly. Staff have noted in informal interviews over the years that working extended shifts near Ötzi's chamber has a quality they find difficult to articulate, distinct from working near other ancient remains. These are subjective reports. They are consistent reports from people who had no reason to coordinate them. If the deaths are coincidence, why does the pattern specifically include the first handler, the guide to the site, the official filmmaker, the original discoverer, the man who searched for the discoverer, the lead archaeologist, and the blood analyst, the 7 people most physically and professionally central to the discovery, rather than distributing randomly across the 100+ researchers who have studied him? Why was Tom Loy's rare blood disorder connected by the timing of his Ötzi work in his own research notes? And what was in the blood samples he was analyzing when he died? Number 7. Black Aggie. The year is 1905. You are walking through Druid Ridge Cemetery in Pikesville, Maryland, late in the afternoon, when you notice a new installation on the grave of General Felix Agnes, recently deceased proprietor of the Baltimore American newspaper. It is a bronze-seated woman, life-size, draped in a heavy shrouded cloak. Her face is bowed, her hands rest in her lap, and she has no eyes. Where the eyes should be, 2 blank, shallow hollows, the bronze smoothed over them, leaving nothing. Not closed eyes, not stylized eyes, an absence where eyes would be. This is Black Aggie. She sat in that cemetery for 40 years. The Smithsonian Institution has her now. She is not on display. The statue was commissioned by General Agnes from sculptor Edouard Pausch in 1905 and modeled as a near-direct copy of one of the most celebrated sculptures in America, the Adams Memorial in Rock Creek Park, Washington, D.C. That original was created by Augustus St. Gaudens in 1891 for Henry Adams, in memory of his wife Marion, who had died by suicide in 1884 after drinking a bottle of potassium cyanide in her darkroom. St. Gaudens's commission emerged from grief so private that Henry Adams refused to name the figure or explain it. He described it only as the mystery of the hereafter. He never placed a plaque. The original remains one of the great American sculptures, a figure that is neither male nor female, neither living nor dead, with an expression that visitors describe as producing a feeling they cannot name. Pausch copied it. The St. Gaudens estate sued for plagiarism in 1906 and won. The Agnes family acknowledged the derivative status. The statue remained in the cemetery. By the 1920s, Druid Ridge had developed a local reputation that the management could not suppress. The grass in the permanent shadow beneath the statue did not grow. Birds did not land on or near the bronze. Night watchmen reported figures gathered around it in the early hours, standing in silence. Cemetery workers found evidence at dawn candles, objects at the base, disturbed ground that no one could account for. Fraternity initiations from Johns Hopkins University began incorporating a tradition of spending the night in the statue's arms as proof of courage. Multiple participants were hospitalized for shock. The cemetery banned this practice explicitly, documented in their administrative records, because banning it required acknowledging that it was happening regularly enough to require a policy. In 1967, after decades of vandalism, reported incidents, and one documented attempt by unknown parties to physically remove the statue under cover of night, Druid Ridge Cemetery removed Black Aggie from the Agnes grave. The family donated her to the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian placed her in storage. She has been there for over 50 years. The official explanation, to whatever extent one has been provided, cites the plagiarism, judgment, and sensitivity around displaying a work legally ruled derivative. This is not how the Smithsonian handles acquisitions. The institution displays disputed and derivative works regularly. The plagiarism judgment was resolved in 1906. The statue was accepted in 1967. No exhibition has ever featured it. No public catalog entry describes her current location within the Smithsonian's holdings. Press inquiries receive confirmation that the object is in the collection, without additional detail. The original Adams Memorial is still in Rock Creek Park. Still open to the public, visitors regularly report weeping in front of it without knowing why. They sit with it for hours. They return. The National Park Service does not discourage extended visits. The copy sits in a Smithsonian warehouse, unlabeled in public records, maintained but not seen. The darker possibility here is institutional rather than supernatural. Two major American institutions, a cemetery and a museum, each made administrative decisions to remove this object from public view and keep it from further view. The cemetery's reasons were concrete: documented incidents, repeated vandalism, hospitalized fraternity students. The Smithsonian's reasons have never been stated in those terms. If plagiarism sensitivity were the genuine reason, the object would have been donated on, deaccessioned, or at minimum, described in a public catalog. None of those things have happened in 50 years. The object is being held, not displayed, not explained, not given away. Why does the Smithsonian not display a significant American bronze sculpture it has owned for over 50 years when the reason given plagiarism sensitivity was resolved 6 decades before the acquisition? What is in the hospitalization records from the fraternity initiations at Druid Ridge Cemetery? And why, when you ask the Smithsonian where specifically within their collection Black Aggie is located, do they decline to say? Number 8. The Crystal Skull of Doom. The year is 1924. You are Anna Mitchell Hedges, 17 years old, assisting your adoptive father, F.A. Mitchell Hedges, on an excavation at Luban Tun, a ruined Maya city in what is now Belize. The team has been clearing rubble from a collapsed pyramid structure for weeks. One morning you descend into the dig site and your lantern catches something beneath a stone altar. You reach in. You pull out a human skull carved from a single piece of clear rock crystal, anatomically perfect, the size of an actual skull, the jaw detached and hinged so it moves independently. It weighs 11 pounds. It is so optically pure that a light shone beneath it illuminates the entire structure from within, the eye sockets glowing. You carry it into the sunlight. This is the Mitchell Hedges skull. For 60 years, it was considered the finest pre-Columbian artifact in existence. Then, in the 1990s, we discovered it was almost certainly not Mesoamerican, not pre-Columbian, and not ancient. The people who spend time looking into it have not stopped reporting visions. Crystal skulls first appeared on the European art market in the late 19th century, sold as Aztec or Maya religious objects. The primary dealer was Eugène Bobon, a French antique dealer based in Mexico City, with access to archaeological sites and a clientele of European buyers who could not distinguish genuine pre-Columbian work from sophisticated recent manufacture. Bobon sold specimens to the Trocadero Museum in Paris and to private collectors whose pieces later entered the British Museum and the Smithsonian Institution. In 1996, the British Museum applied scanning electron microscopy to its crystal skull. The results were unambiguous: rotary tool marks from modern metal drill bits and polishing equipment that did not exist in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. In 2008, the Smithsonian Institution subjected their skull to the same analysis, conducted by archaeologist Jane McLaren Walsh and published in the Journal of Archaeological Science. Same result: 19th to 20th century European lapidary manufacture. Both institutions moved their skulls from display to storage. The official reason: no longer considered authentic pre-Columbian artifacts, and therefore outside the scope of the relevant collection. The Mitchell Hedges skull was never submitted for independent scientific testing during Anna's lifetime. She owned it until her death in 2007 and declined every request. The skull passed to her companion Bill Homan and remains in private ownership. A limited examination by Hewlett-Packard's Crystal Laboratory in 1970 produced findings that have never been satisfactorily resolved. The HP engineers noted that the skull appeared to have been carved against the axis of the crystal, a direction that should cause the crystal to shatter under any applied cutting pressure. More significantly, their instruments at the time detected no tool marks at all. The HP report is documented by crystal researcher Nick Nocerino. The absence of tool marks in 1970 does not disprove the British Museum's 1996 result. HP's instruments were not scanning electron microscopes, and the examination was limited in scope. The later institutional testing used more rigorous methodology. The skull is probably 19th century European manufacture. But the institutional testing did not stop the reports. Since the 1970s, A consistent series of experiences has been documented by people who spent extended time in proximity to the Mitchell-Hedges skull specifically. Parapsychologist Norman Emerson documented accounts in 1971. Researcher Joshua Shapiro collected reports through the 1980s and 1990s. The pattern across independent accounts is specific. Light effects inside the skull appearing in darkened rooms, low-frequency sounds described as hums, and visual experiences with recurring imagery that researchers have noted across people who had no contact with each other before being asked for their own accounts. Visual phenomena inside optically pure quartz are explainable as physics. The skull's cut and polish could produce internal reflections that appear, in specific lighting conditions, to move. This is real. What is less explainable is the consistency of the reported content of the visions across people who received no prior information about what others had seen. The two institutional skulls are in storage after testing. The most famous skull remains untested and in private hands. If the British Museum and Smithsonian moved their skulls simply because they were fakes, why are they not in the publicly accessible storage inventory of either institution? What specifically did the analysts experience in the time they spent with the skulls before, during, and after testing, and did anyone think to ask? And if the Mitchell-Hedges skull is 19th century European manufacture, how does a German lapidary in the 1880s produce a crystal object that a Hewlett-Packard engineering team in 1970 says should have shattered during the process of its own creation? Number 9. The Koh-i-Noor diamond. The year is 1739. You are Nader Shah of Persia, and you have just done what no conqueror in 2 centuries managed. You have sacked Delhi. You have taken the peacock throne. Your army is leaving with wealth that will not be matched again until the 20th century. But the diamond everyone calls Mountain of Light is still missing. An informant tells you the defeated Emperor Muhammad Shah is wearing it, sewn into his turban. You invite him to a banquet. You propose a gesture of reconciliation, an exchange of turbans, a custom of brotherhood between rulers. He cannot refuse. You leave the tent, unwind the turban in private, and after a few minutes, searching the folds of fabric, find a stone, 186 carats in weight, that burns in your hand like captured light. The account says you wept. You said Koh-i-Noor, Mountain of Light. You took it back to Persia. 8 years later, your own guards assassinated you. The Koh-i-Noor diamond is currently 105.6 carats, reduced from its original size by British recutting in 1852, set in a crown on display at the Tower of London. It has been in British possession since 1849, when the East India Company extracted it from Duleep Singh, the 10-year-old Sikh Maharaja, as a condition of the Treaty of Lahore following the annexation of the Punjab. It is the most diplomatically contested gemstone in the world, with active return claims from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. There is a written curse associated with the diamond. It appears in multiple Mughal and Persian historical sources, including the travels of Niccolo Manucci, a Venetian physician who spent decades at the Mughal court and recorded his observations in the early 18th century. The curse reads, "He who owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. Only God, or a woman, can wear it with impunity. The male ownership death chain is not legend. It is historical record." The Kakatiya dynasty held the stone until 1306. The commander who seized it in battle was assassinated. Shah Jahan, who incorporated the stone into the peacock throne, was imprisoned by his son Aurangzeb for the last 8 years of his life. Aurangzeb died watching his empire begin to collapse. Muhammad Shah was stripped of it by Nader Shah. Nader Shah was assassinated. Ahmad Shah Durrani founded a dynasty his descendants lost within 2 generations. Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who held it from 1813 to 1839, died of a stroke. His empire was dismantled by the British within a decade. Duleep Singh, 10 years old when it was taken, converted to Christianity under British management, attempted to reclaim his heritage, and died broke in Paris at 55. Queen Victoria received the stone and wore it. She was not deposed. She was not murdered. She died at 81 after a 63-year reign. Buckingham Palace maintains an official protocol regarding the Koh-i-Noor. It is set in the crown of the Queen Consort, not the crown of the King. This has been acknowledged as a tradition based on historical precedent in official palace communications. A spokesperson addressed it specifically when questions arose around King Charles III's coronation in 2023. King Charles did not wear the stone. The crown containing it was placed on the altar during the ceremony. The British monarchy, in 2023, was managing a diamond placement based on a 1,000-year-old Hindu curse about male versus female wearers. This is not symbolism. It is institutional memory in active operation. The official explanation for the protocol is tradition, the same language used to justify almost every royal ceremonial decision. But the tradition exists because successive British monarchs observed what the stone did to every man who held it before they arrived, and made a practical institutional decision accordingly. India requested the diamond's return in 1947, declined. Pakistan filed a formal claim in 1976, declined. Afghanistan in 2000, declined. Iran's claim predates all of these. In each case, the British government's legal argument is that the Treaty of Lahore, signed by a 10-year-old under military occupation, constitutes valid transfer of title. 4 sovereign nations have examined this reasoning and found it insufficient. The diamond is at the Tower of London. You can look at it. You can look at 105.6 carats of a stone connected to the deaths or overthrows of every man who held it for 3,000 years, sitting in a crown that the current King of England has decided, for reasons officially called tradition, not to wear. Why has no British institution commissioned a formal historical study of the male ownership death chain, a piece of archival work that would take a single researcher 2 years and produce a publishable finding? What was the specific internal conversation that produced the only in the Queen Consort's crown protocol? And if the curse is historical fiction, why does King Charles not simply wear the diamond? Number 10. Tutankhamun's canopic chest. The date is November 26, 1922. You are Howard Carter standing in a corridor cut into the bedrock of the Valley of the Kings, holding a candle through a small hole you have just drilled in a plastered doorway. Lord Carnarvon is standing behind you in the dark. He says, "Can you see anything?" You hold the candle steady and wait for your eyes to adjust. Gold catches the light. Everywhere gold. Animal couches with gilded heads. Alabaster vessels. Shrines. Furniture. Thousands of objects stacked to the ceiling, untouched for 3,200 years. Yes, you say, wonderful things. You know the gold mask. You know the curse. What you may not know is that hundreds of objects from Tutankhamun's tomb have never been publicly displayed, not because of conservation concerns, not because of space limitations, but because the Egyptian authorities who hold them have stated, directly, that some of what Tutankhamun was buried with was not intended to be seen by the living. Howard Carter's excavation of KV-62 ran from 1922 to 1932 and produced 5,398 objects. The gold mask, the throne, the gilded shrines, the jewelry, these are in the permanent galleries of the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, and constitute the most visited ancient collection on Earth. But the full KV-62 inventory has never been fully exhibited. Not in 1922, not in the century since. Lord Carnarvon was the first of the excavation's significant figures to die. He entered the inner chambers in November 1922. He died in April 1923, 5 months later. Of blood poisoning from a mosquito bite he accidentally reopened while shaving an infected wound that became septicemia and pneumonia in a man whose lungs were already compromised by tuberculosis. He was 57. Arthur Mace, the archaeologist who helped Carter open and clear the innermost chamber, collapsed during the work and never fully recovered. He died in 1928. Aaron Ember, a professor of Egyptology and personal friend of Carnarvon, died in a house fire in 1926. Arthur Weigall, a journalist and Egyptologist who attended the opening, died of an unknown fever in 1934. Hugh Evelyn White, who had excavated nearby at Deir el-Bahri, hanged himself in 1924, reportedly leaving a message attributing his death to a curse. Howard Carter lived until 1939, 17 years after entering the tomb. He died of lymphoma at 64, having outlasted nearly everyone who was present for the discovery. If there is a curse, it was selective. The microbiology explanation for the earliest deaths is real and partial. A 2011 study by microbiologist Gotthard Kramer at the University of Leipzig confirmed that sealed ancient tombs can preserve viable spores of Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus mold species, capable of causing fatal pneumonia in immunocompromised individuals. Carnarvon had compromised lungs. He was clinically the most vulnerable person who entered that tomb. The exposure was real. The biological mechanism for his death exists. It does not account for all subsequent deaths, which extended years beyond initial exposure. It does not account for Evelyn White's note, and it does not address the specific objects that have never been exhibited. The canopic chest is an alabaster shrine that held the 4 canopic jars containing Tutankhamun's preserved organs, his liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, each wrapped with its own protective deity. The chest is exquisitely made, carved with protective texts and the faces of the 4 goddesses who guard the cardinal points. It has been exhibited in Cairo on very limited occasions. It is currently in climate-controlled storage. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities' position, stated in interviews with multiple officials over the past 2 decades, is that certain objects from the tomb retain their original ritual function and were specifically created to operate in darkness, in enclosure, in the presence of the dead, not in a gallery. This is not the language of conservation. This is the language of a culture that built the objects and still understands what they were made to do. The same position applies to approximately 413 of the 5,398 objects from KV-62. They are catalogued. They are preserved. They have never been exhibited. No exhibition is planned. Egyptian authorities who hold them have, across decades of requests, declined to bring them to public view and have been more specific about the reason than most people realize. These objects were not made for the living. Displaying them violates something the Egyptians considered an active concern, not a historical abstraction. What they are protecting, the objects, the public, or something else entirely, has never been stated in a way that closes the question. 10 artifacts. 10 institutions that looked at what they possessed and made the same choice. Keep it out of sight. Control the information. Do not explain. A screaming mummy without a name. A mummy board rotated off display for reasons no conservation document supports. A criminal's hand worn down from use. A gemstone that broke a rational man who disbelieved in curses. A vase the Italian government will not locate. A glacier corpse ringed by a chain of deaths. A bronze woman in a Smithsonian warehouse. Crystal skulls tested and quietly shelved. A diamond 4 nations are trying to reclaim, and even its current owners are afraid to let their king wear. And a tomb full of wonderful things, hundreds of which you will never see, because the people responsible for them decided you shouldn't. The pattern is not curses. The pattern is that every one of these objects forced the people in power to make a choice. And every time, without exception, they chose to bury the story rather than tell it. If you want to know what else they've buried, subscribe. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from. And tell us, which one of these would you least want to own?